Good afternoon, dear students. And now let's our next session on IELTS lessons. Look at this picture. This is Venn diagrams. Do you know what do Venn diagrams usually show us? Look very carefully. Yes, you're right. Venn diagrams show us differences and similarities of two different scenes. And today we're going to start our lesson that is about more comparison and contrast, more complex terms. You know that differences are about contrast and similarities are about comparison. And we're going to study this today. The aim of today's lesson is to improve IELTS skills, writing skills on IELTS Task 1 and IELTS Task 2. The learners will be able to describe IELTS Task 1 and 2 through comparing and contrasting. Also, we will study more complex terms on comparison and contrast, and we will recycle some vocabulary on comparison and contrast that we have already studied. Okay, first let's talk about some types of diagrams and charts for IELTS Task 1. Do you know any of diagrams or charts used for IELTS Task 1? Also, please think about some other types of writing used for IELTS Task 1. Very good. And now here some types for you. Can you please write the names of these charts? The first one is a line chart. The second is a bar chart. The third one is a pie chart. Here we have a table. And the last is map. This is a kind of diagram also used in IELTS Task 1. What do you think is similar between all those things? Yes, they are used for comparison and contrasting some information, some data. Okay, today we are going to talk about different IELTS Task 1s. We are going to describe graphs, tables and charts that are used for comparison and contrast, and we are going to develop our comparison and contrast vocabulary. Let's look at the first diagram. What is this? Very good. This is a bar chart. This bar chart shows the average cost of housing in rural, urban and suburban areas in 2000 and 2010. If we look at the general trend of this bar chart, we can see that the cost of housing in all three areas rose significantly from 2000 to 2010. But what about comparison? Can you compare some specific details in this diagram? And here we can see the answers. If we compare the specific details, we can see the following scene. The average cost of housing is lowest in the rural area. Have you found? And the highest in the urban area. In 2000, the average cost of urban housing was twice that of rural housing. The average cost of suburban housing in 2010 was almost 3 times as much as the cost of 2000. You can see how can be all those three areas compared and contrasted. And if you look here, lowest, highest, twice that of something, almost 3 times as much as something, all those words and phrases are used in order to compare and contrast some things while you are doing IELTS Task 1. The same thing we can use in tables. Look at the general description and trends of this table. What does this table show? The table shows the average cost of lunch and dinner and the average time spent eating these meals at 3 different types of restaurant, and those types are sit-down restaurant, cafeteria and fast food restaurant. Talking about the general trend, we can see that the cost of meal at any of the restaurants becomes higher at dinner time. Very good. And now the task for you. Can you compare the following scenes? Can you compare the cost of lunch at a sit-down restaurant and the cost of lunch at a cafeteria? Second, compare the cost of lunch and dinner at fast food restaurant. And the third one, compare the time spent eating lunch with the time spent eating dinner at a cafeteria. While you are doing this comparing, I want to tell you that this is the detailed description of the table. And doing IELTS task 1, we should not forget about the general information, the general trend, and of course the detailed description. That will take us the most parts of our IELTS task 1 writing. Now let's look and compare our answers. First question. The average cost of lunch at a sit-down restaurant is $3 higher than the cost at a cafeteria. If we look at the table, we can see that the average cost of lunch at sit-down restaurant is $10. What about cafeteria? It is $7. So that means it is $3 higher. The second question. The average cost of dinner at a fast food restaurant is just 50 cents more than average cost of lunch. Look at the fast food column and you can see that lunch costs $4.50 while dinner costs $5. And the third question, on average, people spend 30 minutes eating lunch at a cafeteria and 15 minutes longer than this eating dinner. Very good. And look at these phrases in bold. Such phrases can help us to show the details in the table. Not all of them, but the main one. And also, these phrases are used in order to compare and contrast some data, some information given in this table. But you know that comparing and contrasting is also used in IELTS task 2. What do you think? In what kind of essay it could be used? Of course, it could be used in any essay, and the main thing, comparing and contrasting essay. Now I want you to look at these questions. There are 8 questions where you need to ask for contrasting or for comparing. First, try these questions and ask each other. And let's see, what kind of answers do you have? Very good. Now, let's put con if the question asking for contrasting, and put comp if it's asking for comparison. Okay, now let's see our answers. The first is contrasting. How is greed different from envy? And what is the main key phrase here to help us? Different from. Very good. The second one, it is also contrasting. How does a mobile phone differ from a landline phone? Differ from. This is the key word for us to help. The third one, comparing. How are dogs and cats alike? So when you're talking about comparing, you look for similarities. Do you remember the Venn diagram about cats and dogs? How are they alike? This is comparing, or we're talking about similarities. As for contrast, where we're talking about differences, and look at the question number 4. In what ways are trains and planes different? The next is comparing again. What are the similarities between a chair and a stool? Number 6, again comparing. Can you list 3 ways a restaurant and a cafeteria are alike? Let's look at the next one. This is contrasting. What are the differences between classical music and hip-hop? And the last one. This is also comparing. How are Japan and Madagascar the same? Okay, and do you know how are they are the same? Of course, both of them are islands. Now, let's revise some vocabulary on comparing and contrasting. Comparing means similarities, contrasting means differences. Now, put the words in the right lines. And here we have the following words and phrases. Almost the same as, in common with, different from, in contrast to, in the same way, less than, otherwise, similarly, slower than, just as, more than, resemblance, and however. Now let's look at the answers. For comparison, we use the following phrases: almost the same as, in common with, in the same way, similarly, just as, and resemblance. Resemblance means similar. Similarity. And what about B? Contrast. Different from, in contrast to, less than, otherwise, slower than, more than, however. Now let's do the following task and practice this vocabulary. You need to complete the blanks with words that show comparison or contrast. Use the words in the list below. Some words may be used more than once, and don't forget to add capitals where necessary. By the way, look at all those words and tell me please, are they for comparing or for contrasting? Very good. These words are used in order to compare. And here is the task. A restaurant is a place where you order food and it is brought to your table. A cafeteria is... And now please continue doing this task. Very good. Now let's see our answers. A restaurant is a place where you order food and it is brought to your table. A cafeteria is similar to restaurant, except that in cafeteria you serve yourself. There are several ways in which restaurant and a cafeteria are alike. In both places you can eat a good meal without cooking it yourself. In a restaurant you select your meal from a menu. In cafeteria, you can also choose your meal from among several different possibilities, just as in a restaurant. Finally, in both a restaurant and a cafeteria, you have to pay for what you eat. All those words, vocabulary words, are used in order to compare restaurant and cafeteria. How similar are they? Now, I would like you to watch the video how to write compare and contrast essay. We have already practiced the vocabulary and now this is your turn to write. But before writing, please watch very interesting and useful video.
This presentation will cover compare and contrast essays and when they are best to be used and how to formulate them when you begin organizing your material. When compare and contrast essays are used, I think sometimes students get confused by this. I think they lose sight of the fact that a compare and contrast essay, just because it can be written doesn't mean that it should be written. You know, there are reasons that we need to write. All writing has a purpose, and these are the best purposes or reasons for writing the compare-contrast essay. The first is when we're comparing items that appear to be similar, but you actually believe as the writer that those items are different. That the majority of the people, maybe you've read a text and people think two characters are alike, maybe you think two items are alike, or the majority of the people that you've talked to, or the consensus that you get back from your classmates, any of that, but you see an actual difference, then that's a reason to write a compare-contrast essay. Another one could be that you're comparing items that appear to be different, or that the majority of the people you've talked to, or the consensus is that these things are different, but you as the writer actually see them as similar, and you want to explore that. The reason I say this is because a lot of people will often want to write a compare-contrast essay that compares the obvious. And you don't want to write about the obvious. If I can immediately establish a distinction between two things or find similarity, I need to write an essay on that. So, focus on topics where it's the majority of the people, or the people that you're going to address in your audience, they see something differently than you see it, and that gives you a reason to write the essay in the first place. Some other reasons that you would write a compare-contrast: perhaps you're comparing two items or options, one of which you prefer over the other based upon a specific criteria that you specify or explain through the course of your essay. One thing is, but these are the two options we have for what we're going to do. This is the most preferred, or this is the one I believe to be the best choice, and here's why. Another reason would be which is similar to the one above it, is just comparing two items or options to report on their differences, or to report on their similarities, or to report on what our options are. And that's strictly a reporting type of essay. That's one where you step back and you're not really trying to be argumentative. You're just trying to show, here's this side, here's the other side. You try to be unbiased in the delivery of it. And when we're reporting, that's fine. The first three are more or less an argumentative approach to writing. And those are the things that you'll often have to do when you write essays for college. You'll have to write essays like that, or reports of that nature, sometimes in a job environment where you're asked to make a decision or give an opinion. But you'll also be asked at different times in college and examine these two things and tell us, the differences between them. Tell us what the good is and the bad, the pros and the cons are for both. So compare-contrast comes in handy for a lot of those. Argumentative writing is probably what I focus on the most with this presentation, but any of this information could be used for either an argument or a non-biased report. The way we format a compare-contrast essay, there are two basic styles that you can use, two basic ways to organize the information. The first one is called the block format, and the other one is called the point-by-point format. The block format has a style where each item is separated into its own discrete section. In other words, you're going to write first about one of the items completely, talk about everything, then you're going to write in the next section or paragraph all about the other item. They'll never really touch one another. You'll just, here's this point, here's the other point. Moving on. The point-by-point format is a little more engaging with both topics, because what you do is you look at the individual aspects within each of the items and compare those directly within paragraphs. So, when it comes to this particular aspect, here's this side, here's the other side. Then you move to the next aspect, and now here's the other side, here's this side. And you move through it that way. That sort of engages the topics better. It works if we were to write the essay. So let's say for this example, our family has to decide if we're going to take a vacation to the beach or to the mountains. Okay? We want to evaluate both options to help the family decide where to go, and then I have been tasked with comparing the two options and presenting the findings to the family. All right? So if we're going to use that, are we going to the beach or are we going to the mountains? If we're going to use the block format, here's sort of how the format would play out. We'll have an introduction that will say, should we vacation at the beach or in the mountains? Here's the plan. Here's the game plan for us. Then the first paragraph will talk about all the beach information. So in that paragraph or in that section, could be more than one paragraph, but all of it's contained in one place. We cover maybe the accommodations. Here's the daytime activities for the beach. Here are the evening entertainment options for the beach. My next paragraph, here's the information for the mountains. Here's the accommodations where we'd be staying at the mountains. These are our daytime activities. These are our entertainment options for the evening. And we may or may not, depending on if it's a report, if it's an argument, we may or may not have a paragraph 3, which would offer the pros and cons of both, where we would say, here's what the beach has to offer that seems better, here's what the mountains have to offer that seems better, and then the conclusion would be, here are the options we have, now we have to make a decision. So that would be the block format. And you see all that information is kept separate. Really one part exclusively about the mountains and the other part. Then there's a last little bit where you sort of compare both or talk about the issues as they relate, and then you conclude. So everything's sort of contained that's, in my mind, would be a really comparative or comparison contrast situation. All of that sort of just happens in that third paragraph. Okay? And I will give you full disclosure that I'm not a huge fan of the block format, and I'll explain why later. But, different people have different preferences, but for me, the block format is a weaker approach to take. There are only certain situations where the block format should be used or has to be used. But anyway, we'll move on to the point by point. Point by point format, if I were taking the same information, if it was going to be the beach or the mountains for vacation, here's how it would look. The introduction, still going to be, should we vacation at the beach or in the mountains? But the first paragraph, instead of talking exclusively about the beach, I'm going to talk about the accommodations, because both of the options have accommodations as an aspect of it. So with this, I can say, here are the accommodations. The beach offers this. The mountains offer this. Of these, this one seems the best option of the two. If it's not an argumentative essay where you're not trying to persuade one way or the other, then the which seems the best of the two, you could remove that. You wouldn't have that. Okay? But here I've offered the accommodations. I've offered both. Then my next paragraph would talk about the daytime activities. Here's what the beach offers. Here's what the mountain offers. Would be this, and here's why. Third paragraph, here's the evening entertainment, the beach offering, same kind of format, but what you're doing is you're talking about both of the items at once. You're pushing them into one another and you're comparing them. That way a reader can see directly what the differences are between the two things. If I look at the beach offerings in the other format, in the block format, I've got to wait another paragraph before I find out what the mountains offer in regards to that. And here we can see the comparison right away. It's immediately in front of us. And then we can have the same conclusion based on this. This is where we should go, or based on these findings, now we have to make a decision. So it's basically the same essay format. It's basically the same essay. It's a different format for both. Now, there are pros and cons to both, and I want to examine those, and we'll talk about it. When we're talking about the block format, it focuses exclusively on one item at a time. So, if you want to write in that manner, then it gives you a moment to focus exclusively on one of the topics before you move into the other one. It limits any actual comparing and contrasting to one paragraph, if that, because sometimes people don't have that third paragraph at all. They just say, here's the paragraph where here's all the stuff from the beach, here's all the stuff from the mountains, and now I'm going to wipe my hands clean, I'm done. And that to me is why it doesn't really fulfill a strong comparison-contrast element, because in a comparison-contrast essay, you want to see comparison and chocolate chip cookie, and all you get is just a sugar cookie with one chocolate chip in it. That's not really a chocolate chip cookie, is it? So I guess that's my frame of mind with the block format. The other danger, I think, with a block format is, especially if you're trying to write an argumentative essay where you're bringing something new to the table, or you're offering a unique idea, or you're seeing some comparisons that other people aren't seeing, and you want to highlight that, if you keep the items so separate, then you run the risk of summarizing too much and you don't apply any critical thinking skills. If all I'm talking about is the beach and all that's my primary focus, all I'm doing really is summarizing the details from the beach. Whereas if I immediately throw in, but the mountains offer this, then that pushes me with my next sentence to explain why one is better over the other. Okay? You also can run the risk with a block format of writing a Frankenpaper. And if you've seen one of my prior presentations, I think on incorporating sources, we've talked about the Frankenpaper, where it seems like you've taken 2 papers or 3 papers or a bunch of stuff and smushed them all together and tried to make them one paper. And sometimes a block format essay looks like it's too many essays that have been stuck into one another. They've just been attached at the edge. Midway through, you switch topics and talk about something else entirely. And I think the block format really prevents you from having a strong thesis statement, because if your thesis says I'm going to argue point A and point B, then you're not really arguing A and B all the way through your paper. You're just talking about A at the beginning and B at the middle or the end, and then you're Now, the block format can be useful when you're providing just a basic report. Here's this idea, here's the next idea. Or when the information between the two items you're examining, when it's so different that you can't find those aspects that can push those two topics together, that you can examine them thoroughly by their aspects. But my question, if it's that, if they're so different or disparate, then I'm not sure what the point of writing a compare and contrast essay would be for those, because the whole point is to see the contrasting ideas or the comparative ideas. So it can work, but like I said, the block format, it's kind of tricky, it's touchy, and it can lead you down an improper path. With a point-by-point format, the difference is that you're directly comparing both items that you're for the compare contrast. You're comparing them directly in every single paragraph. You know, you're finding or every single section at least, because you're finding items or aspects within the items that you can compare directly in that moment, as opposed to waiting until the last paragraph to do any of it. The comparison, again, it occurs throughout the essay, so you're really fulfilling the idea of what comparing and contrasting are. It pushes beyond the basic summary of points and forces a more skills, and that's what teachers and professors go bananas over. They want to see that a student can apply good, strong critical thinking skills. And if you're pushing the ideas directly together, each of the items, then it's allowing you more space to create your own idea and have your own ideas or your own opinions about the topic based on what you've presented. And it's less chance that someone's going to say, oh, all you're doing really is just summarizing the points or summarizing details. And I think this format is definitely more effective when you're arguing, because the audience can see firsthand how you're comparing the items, line by line, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. Whereas if you're using that block format, they may have to wait for that third paragraph where you try to bring together the pros and the cons, or you're evaluating the ideas in order to they're having to wait until then to see the points being made. And a lot of times when students would come to me when I've taught or when I've worked in tutoring labs, and they would bring their essays in a block format because that's what they're comfortable writing, it's really easy once you've written it in that block format just to look and see how you can move pieces of the sentences of the paragraphs up and actually turn into that point-by-point format. That, and if you do that third paragraph from the block format where you examine the good and the bad, or the pros and the cons from each of the items you've compared, you can work those up into the paragraphs already. You can move those up into the paragraphs when you separate them into the various aspects. So if you start with a block format, it's pretty easy to turn that into a point-by-point essay. So if you're unsure about the point-by-point, go ahead and write the block format, and then know as you're writing that then you're going to go through and find, well, where are the aspects I can compare? Well, here are the accommodations from this paragraph, the accommodations from that paragraph, and then my commentary on the accommodations in the third paragraph. Let me just pull all those out and build that into a paragraph on its own. And then you can just take the pieces and move them around. So I think you can get a point-by-point format essay out of the block format. When you write, you want to be sure you use one or the other. Okay? And while my preference is point-by-point, sometimes it just doesn't work that way, and you have to do a block format, and now you know the ways and the approaches to take. So I hope this is beneficial for you, and then you can just take the pieces and move them around. So I think you can get a point-by-point format essay out of the block format. When you write, you want to be sure you use one or the other. Okay? And while my preference is point-by-point, sometimes it just doesn't work that way, and you have to do a block format, and now you know the ways and the approaches to take. So I hope this is beneficial for you, and
Let's do the last task for today. It is called Find Odd One Out. The word that is not similar to these words, or that is different from all other words. Which word is different and is not similar? Can you compare and contrast? Very good. The answer is in the same way, because this is used to compare. All other words, however, more than and differ from, are used to contrast things, to show differences. Let's look at the next one. Very good. And the word is differ from, which is used in order to contrast things. What about others? Alike, in common with, and resemblance? They are used to compare things. They are used to show similarities. Okay, thank you very much for the lesson, and I would like you to reflect on the lesson. What have we learned and practiced today? What was interesting for you and why? Did you like the lesson and why? Thank you very much. Now here you can see the list of references that you can use also in order to expand your vocabulary on comparing and contrasting and practice some IELTS tasks, task 1 and task 2, to compare and contrast. Thank you very much. All necessary materials you can find at moodle.nis.edu.kz. Thank you. Goodbye.